Millionaire abandons his pregnant wife, but years later, at an award ceremony, he regrets it deeply. New York City, a city that never sleeps, pulsed with an energy that could ignite the dreams of the ambitious and crush the fragile hearts of the naive. The skyline stretched high, illuminated by the promise of success, casting shadows over the streets where the real stories unfolded, stories of dreams made and broken, all in the span of a heartbeat. James Parker stood at the top of a building that reflected his rise, sleek, modern, cold. It was a symbol of his success, one that came at a price he was willing to pay. At 32, he had everything he had ever wanted: wealth, power, influence, and the promise of an even greater legacy. His mind, sharp and calculating, never rested. He surrounded himself with people who fueled his ambition, people like Liam Collins, his business partner, whose loyalty had proven invaluable in his pursuit of more. Liam, unlike James, wore his emotions openly. He admired James for his unwavering commitment to success, even if it meant making difficult choices. "You're building something that will last forever, James," he often said, offering encouragement with a gleam of admiration in his eyes. But James was beyond flattery. His eyes were always fixed on the future, on what could be, rather than what was. Sophia Mitchell, on the other hand, was not a part of this world, or at least she hadn't been. When they met, she was studying at a small college in Manhattan, far removed from the world of billion-dollar deals and high-rise offices. Her warmth was her charm, the kind that made her forgettable to many, but unforgettable to James. She had met him at a charity event, a place where the elite mingled to showcase their virtue. But James had seen something in her that he hadn't expected: genuine kindness. For a moment, his cold, calculating exterior had cracked, revealing something deeper. Sophia had fallen in love with James almost immediately, captivated by his ambition, the way he could command a room with just a look. But she hadn't realized how cold he truly was. His love was conditional, contingent upon her acceptance of his vision, his empire. He often spoke of his plans for the future, of how he intended to leave a legacy that would make his name. But he never spoke of her in those plans, not in the way she had imagined. Their relationship had been intense, fast, and passionate. But it was also fleeting, as though James was always a few steps ahead, never truly present. When she discovered she was pregnant, the world shifted beneath her feet. She had never imagined herself as a mother, but there was something about carrying his child that filled her with hope for a future together. She believed in the possibility of change, believed that James would come around, that he might one day choose her over his obsession with success. But that hope was dashed the night James left. He had told her it wasn't the right time, that the demands of his career left no room for a family. His words were cold, his decision absolute. He left her standing in the middle of their apartment, the sound of the door closing behind him echoing like the finality of a tomb. The weeks that followed were a blur of pain and confusion. Sophia had never felt so alone, her heart breaking as she grappled with the reality that the man she loved didn't want the life they could have built together. Sophia didn't tell anyone at first. She kept the news of her pregnancy to herself, not wanting to burden her friends or family. But Emily Lane, her best friend, had noticed the change. Emily had always been the more grounded one, the artist who saw the world through a lens of creativity, and she knew something was wrong the moment she saw Sophia's eyes, those eyes that once shone with hope and love, now clouded with loss. "Are you okay?" Emily had asked one night, sitting beside her on the couch, a soft smile on her face as she painted the canvas before her. "You're not yourself, Sophie. Something's going on." Sophia's voice trembled as she confided in her. "He left me, Emily. James, he's gone. And now I'm pregnant." The words felt like a weight she couldn't lift, but Emily didn't flinch. Instead, she embraced her friend, offering comfort in silence, the kind that spoke louder than any words ever could. As the months passed, Sophia's world became smaller. She focused on herself, on the child she carried, and on finding a way to rebuild. Emily supported her through the darkest days, helping her navigate the challenges of being a single mother. Despite her own artistic career taking off, Emily never hesitated to put Sophia first, constantly lifting her spirits and urging her to keep going, to keep fighting for a future. Meanwhile, James's empire grew. He expanded his businesses across continents, leaving no stone unturned in his quest for dominance. His relationship with Liam grew even more solid, the bond between them unbreakable as they watched their hard work come to fruition. But something inside James began to shift. There were nights when the thought of Sophia would linger in his mind, an image of her standing at the edge of his consciousness, always just out of reach. But he dismissed it, buried it beneath the weight of his ambitions. It wasn't until months later, when a reporter named Ralph Carter reached out to Sophia, that the story truly began to unfold. Ralph had been following her quietly from the sidelines, sensing that there was more to her than the typical rags to riches narrative. He was drawn to her strength, to the way she had risen from the ashes of her heartbreak and built a life that was entirely her own. Sophia's story was one of resilience, but it was also one of unfinished business. James had abandoned her, yes, but she had learned to stand tall in the absence of his support, and yet, as her story continued to unfold, so did James's, his ambition taking him places he hadn't imagined, and a moment of fate bringing their paths back together in the most unexpected of ways. This was the beginning. The stage had been set. But neither James nor Sophia could have anticipated the twists that lay ahead, and soon the world would see how their true connection had always been there, waiting for the right time to emerge. It was a night like any other, yet it was the night that marked the end of everything Sophia had believed in. The soft hum of the city outside their apartment, the light from the skyline casting a pale glow through the windows, had always been a comforting presence. But tonight, that light seemed to mock her, casting long, cold shadows across the space that once felt like home. James was standing by the window, his back to her, hands clasped behind his back, in a posture that could only be described as detached. His eyes were focused on something beyond the city, a future that only he could see. While Sophia stood across the room, her heart pounding, the silence between them growing more oppressive with each passing moment. "Sophia, we need to talk." His voice was firm, no trace of the warmth she once knew in it. She had felt something shift in him recently, a distance she couldn't bridge. It was as if the man she had fallen in love with had disappeared, replaced by someone she didn't recognize. She looked at him, a lump forming in her throat. "What's going on, James? You've been distant for weeks now. I don't understand." She tried to keep her voice steady, but the fear creeping into her words betrayed her. James turned around, his face set in a way that made her stomach twist. He looked like a man who had already made up his mind. "I'm not ready for this. I don't think I ever was," he said, his gaze unwavering, cold. "This pregnancy, it's a complication, Sophia. It's going to be a distraction. I can't afford distractions. Not now. Not when everything is on the line." The words hit her like a physical blow, and for a moment she couldn't breathe. Her mind raced, trying to make sense of what he was saying. "A distraction," she whispered, disbelief making her voice tremble. "You're talking about our child as if it's some kind of inconvenience?" James looked away, his jaw tightening. "I've worked too hard to get here, Sophia. I've built something that could change everything for us. You don't understand the pressure I'm under. There's no room for a family in that equation." She wanted to scream, to tell him how wrong he was, to remind him that they had made promises to each other, that love had been their foundation. But there was something in his eyes, a hardness that told her there was no reaching him now. The man she had known, the man who had once whispered sweet promises in her ear, was gone, replaced by this stranger who couldn't see beyond his own ambition. "You're leaving me," she said quietly, the realization settling like a weight in her chest. It wasn't a question, it was the truth. James hesitated for just a second, his eyes flickering with something unreadable, before he nodded. I think it's the best decision for both of us. You'll be fine, Sophia. You're strong. You'll find a way." With that, he turned and walked out, leaving her standing in the middle of the room, her world shattering around her. The sound of the door closing echoed through the apartment, the finality of it ringing louder than any words he had spoken. Sophia stood frozen, tears welling up in her eyes, but she didn't allow herself to cry. Not yet. Not when she still couldn't fully comprehend what had just happened. The love of her life, the man she had believed in so completely, had just walked away. And worse, he had chosen his career over the family they had created together. The days that followed were a blur. Sophia spent hours staring at the walls, at the empty spaces in their apartment that once felt alive with the promise of a shared future. She couldn't bring herself to pack his things or erase his presence from their home. The pain was too raw, too consuming. But life didn't wait for heartbreak. It kept moving forward as it always did. When the reality of her pregnancy set in, so did the flood of gossip and judgment from the outside world. The whispers in her social circle, the pity in people's eyes, everyone seemed to have an opinion on her life, as if she were just another casualty in the city's fast-paced, cutthroat race for success. They didn't know the full story. They didn't know that James had chosen his empire over her, over their child. But Sophia refused to let their words define her. She turned inward, retreating into herself. Her once blossoming career as an artist had taken a back seat during her relationship with James, but now it became her lifeline. She poured herself into her work, focusing on each brushstroke, each color, as if they could wash away the bitterness and confusion that clung to her like a second skin. In time, her art evolved, her style maturing into something deep and introspective. The pain she had been through became the fuel for her creativity, and she found solace in the quiet solitude of her studio. Emily, her best friend, had been there every step of the way, offering unwavering support. She had been the one to hold Sophia when the tears finally came, the one who made sure she never lost sight of who she was beyond the pain. "You don't need him, Soph," Emily would say, her voice a steady anchor in the storm. "You're stronger than this. You're not defined by him, and you sure as hell aren't defined by what he's done to you." It was through Emily's encouragement that Sophia slowly began to rebuild herself. She started to exhibit her work at local galleries, eventually gaining recognition for her talent. As her reputation grew, so did her confidence. She was no longer the broken woman who had been abandoned by the man she thought she'd spent her life with. She was Sophia Mitchell, the artist, the woman who had survived. Meanwhile, James's world continued to spin in a direction that left no room for regret. His rise to power was meteoric, his name becoming synonymous with success in the business world. Deals were struck. Partnerships were formed. He accumulated wealth at an exponential rate, pushing himself harder and harder to stay ahead. Yet there was always an emptiness inside him, a hollow space where the warmth of human connection should have been. He had become so consumed by his empire that he had lost sight of the things that once mattered. He hadn't heard from Sophia in months, but occasionally the thought of her would surface in the back of his mind like a fleeting ghost he couldn't quite banish. He told himself it was for the best. After all, his future was too important, too monumental to be hindered by the past. But deep down, he knew the truth that the legacy he was building would be a hollow one without her. Still, he pushed forward, never looking back, always chasing the next goal, the next victory. And as his empire grew, so did the distance between him and the one person who had ever truly mattered. The night was like something out of a dream, a world of glittering lights, elegant gowns, and sharp tuxedos. The atmosphere was charged with a quiet, yet palpable energy, as the city's elite gathered to celebrate accomplishments and accolades. In the heart of New York City's most exclusive venue, the Grand Ballroom gleamed with opulence. Crystal chandeliers hung like clusters of stars above the polished marble floors, casting a soft glow over the sea of distinguished faces. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and the hum of quiet conversations. James Parker stood at the center of the room, his posture erect and confident. Now, in his late 30s, his outward appearance reflected his success-sharp suit, meticulously combed hair, the glint of gold cufflinks catching the light. His once youthful features had hardened over the years, his jaw a little more square, his eyes a little more distant. The lines around his eyes spoke of long nights spent behind closed doors, negotiating deals, and the weight of responsibilities that had come with his billions. But beneath the polished exterior there was a subtle weariness, a hollowness that hadn't existed in the man he had once been. He had come a long way since the days he had abandoned Sophia, but the thought of her still lingered, despite the layers of success and wealth he had accumulated. It was a feeling he had pushed aside for years, choosing instead to focus on the business that had become his obsession. Yet tonight, something in the air was different, something that made the past creep into his consciousness like an unwelcome shadow. The award he was set to receive was a testament to his rise Entrepreneur of the Year, but the recognition didn't feel as satisfying as it once had. His eyes wandered across the room, scanning the crowd of influencers, executives and entrepreneurs. Then they froze. There, across the room, standing near a group of philanthropists and socialites, was Sophia Mitchell. It took a moment for him to process. She had changed, of course. She had. The soft, uncertain woman he had once known was gone. In her place was someone entirely different. She stood with an air of grace and quiet strength, her posture confident, her head held high. A black flowing dress clung to her frame, the fabric accentuating her silhouette. Her eyes, sharp yet kind, swept over the room, and for a fleeting moment their gazes locked. The instant their eyes met, the space between them seemed to vanish. The noise of the room faded into the background. Time itself seemed to stretch, and James felt his heart skip, as if the years between them had evaporated, leaving only the raw emotions of that long-ago night. The guilt, the regret, everything rushed back in a single heartbeat. Sophia didn't flinch. She held his gaze for a moment, then turned her attention back to the conversation she had been part of. It was as if she had dismissed him completely. To anyone watching she appeared poised and composed, but James could see the flicker in her eyes, the recognition that, despite everything, she still carried the weight of what he had done. Sophia had transformed in ways he hadn't imagined. Her face, once marked by the innocence of youth, now radiated the quiet confidence of a woman who had lived through hardship and emerged stronger. There was no longer any trace of the woman who had been devastated by his abandonment. She was an entirely new person. Her success in the art world was now a well-established fact, her name respected, admired even. But it was her charity work that had truly made her a force to be reckoned with. She had become a symbol of strength, especially for single mothers and abandoned children, the very group she had once been a part of, though she had risen far beyond that world. The applause of the room, however, reminded James that he wasn't alone in his thoughts. He had been invited here for a reason to be honored for his achievements, but the face from his past had brought everything crashing back. Without thinking, he began to move toward her, his feet carrying him in the direction of the one person who had never fully left his thoughts, even when he had tried to bury them. He had never imagined that this moment would come, that they would be in the same room, on the same night, in front of so many people. There were so many things he wanted to say, so many apologies that hung in the air between them. But what could he say? How could he ever explain what he had done? Sophia, however, was well aware of his approach. She didn't need to look up to know he was coming toward her. She could feel the tension in the room, the shift in the air as his presence loomed behind her. She could almost hear the familiar rhythm of his footsteps, the way he always walked with such purpose, such determination. When he was just a few steps away, she finally turned to face him, her expression calm, but her eyes betraying the emotions she had worked so hard to keep at bay. She was still the woman he had known, but she was also someone entirely new. The weight of the past was there, but it no longer had the power to break her. "James," she said, her voice smooth, polite, but there was a hardness to it now, a guardedness that he hadn't expected. She had changed, and it was evident in the way she stood steady, unwavering. "Sophia," he replied, his voice thick with something unspoken, perhaps regret, perhaps longing. For a moment they both stood there, facing each other, the years between them hanging in the air like a forgotten secret. He could see the walls she had built, but he also saw the woman who had survived, who had thrived without him. He wasn't sure what he had expected, but this wasn't it. She wasn't angry. She wasn't broken. She was whole in a way he had never been. "How are you?" he asked, his words simple, but they carried a weight that belied their simplicity. Sophia's gaze softened, but only for a moment. She smiled, a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I'm well. I've done what I set out to do." Her words hit him harder than anything else she could have said. "I've done what I set out to do." It was as if she were telling him that she had no need for him anymore, that her life had moved forward and he had no place in it. The moment stretched, and though the tension was thick, there was no turning back. They had both changed in different ways. The distance between them was no longer just physical, it was emotional, rooted in everything they had lived through. James took a step closer, but Sophia subtly shifted back, her polite demeanor maintaining a careful distance. "I'm glad to see you're doing well, James," she said, her voice steady, but her eyes betrayed the faintest glimmer of emotion, pain, perhaps, or the ghost of something they had once shared. And just like that, the years that had separated them didn't feel like years at all. They were two people standing in the same room, strangers in some ways, but bound by a past neither could escape. The emotions that flooded through James, guilt, regret, longing, threatened to overwhelm him. But Sophia was stronger now, and as she looked at him, she held a quiet power he could no longer claim. The weight of the night's encounter settled on James like a physical burden, a heaviness he couldn't shake. His usual self-assuredness had been shattered, the carefully constructed walls he had built around his emotions beginning to crack. He sat in his hotel suite, alone, staring out at the glittering skyline that had once symbolized all his aspirations, but now felt distant and cold. The glass of whiskey in his hand remained untouched, the amber liquid swaying gently with the subtle tremors of his hand. His mind replayed the brief exchange with Sophia, the way she had looked at him, polite, composed, but indifferent. Her eyes had held no trace of the softness he remembered. There was no longing in her gaze, no hint of the woman who had once clung to the hope of a future together. He leaned back in his chair, closing his eyes, and the memories flooded back. The night he left her, the night he chose everything he had worked for over her, over their unborn child. He had told himself it was the right decision, that he had to focus on his career, that success was the only thing that could guarantee his legacy. But now, in the stillness of his room, the truth was harder to ignore. His mind had been clouded by ambition, by the relentless pursuit of power and wealth. In that moment, he had convinced himself that abandoning Sophia was necessary, that his vision of success couldn't afford the distraction of a family. But what had he truly gained? The accolades, the wealth, the empire, it was all hollow, a monument to his own ambition. But it lacked the warmth of human connection, the love and support that Sophia had once given him so freely. He had walked away from her, from them, and in doing so, he had condemned himself to a life of solitude, one where no matter how much money he made, no matter how many deals he closed, something crucial was always missing. It wasn't just the loss of her that gnawed at him, it was the loss of the man he could have been. The man who had been capable of love, of softness, of compassion. Somewhere along the way, he had traded that in for the cold, calculating businessman he had become. And now, with everything he had ever wanted at his fingertips, he realized it wasn't enough. He hadn't been able to see it back then, but now the emptiness was unbearable. Sophia sat in a quiet cafe the following morning, a cup of coffee in front of her, her fingers tracing the rim of the mug absently. She had arrived early, seeking solace in the ordinary, the mundane, after the emotionally charged encounter the night before. Her mind felt heavy, as though the past had come rushing back to claim her. She hadn't expected the reunion to affect her the way it had. She had told herself she was ready for it. After all, she had built a life without James, one that was independent, strong, and free of the shadows he had cast. But seeing him again, the man who had once promised her the world and then abandoned her when it became too much of a burden, had stirred something deep inside her. There was no anger in her anymore, no bitterness. But there was a sense of finality, a feeling that everything that needed to be said had already been said. She had given him the chance for redemption, but it was clear to her now that the man standing before her was not the same person she had once known. His power, his wealth, they were just distractions, empty markers of success. She wasn't angry at him. What good would anger do? No, she had moved past that. She had to, for her own sake. And yet a part of her had always wondered what would happen if they crossed paths again, if the years apart would bring any kind of resolution. But there would be no resolution, not with James, not now. Sophia's thoughts drifted back to the night she had found out she was pregnant with their child. The shock, the fear, the overwhelming sense of being alone in the world. But the moment she had seen that tiny heartbeat on the ultrasound, a fierce protective instinct had risen in her. She had promised herself, no matter what, she would raise that child alone if she had to. She would give him the life he deserved, even if it meant sacrificing everything she had once dreamed of. She had poured herself into her art, yes, but it had been more than that. She had thrown herself into creating a stable world for her son, focusing on building a life for him, a life that would never have to face the same abandonment she had known. Her son, now 7, was her pride and joy. She had raised him alone, no help from James, no guidance. But she had done it. And in doing so, she had discovered a strength within herself she hadn't known existed. Her thoughts were interrupted when her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen and saw it was James's name. "Can we talk?" Her heart skipped a beat, and she felt the familiar pang of something she hadn't expected to feel: vulnerability. But she pushed it down, focusing on the clarity she had gained over the years. She knew what she had to do. She didn't owe him anything. And yet, she couldn't help herself. She wanted to know if he had truly changed. She wanted to hear him admit finally that he regretted what he had done. They agreed to meet later that afternoon. James arrived at the cafe, his hands tense at his sides, his heart pounding in his chest. He had rehearsed everything he wanted to say, but now, in front of Sophia, he felt the words slipping away. She looked even more beautiful than he remembered, but it wasn't just her appearance that struck him. It was the way she held herself, the strength radiating from her. He sat across from her, the table a silent barrier between them. For a moment, neither spoke. Finally, Sophia broke the silence. "You've changed," she said, her voice quiet but steady. James nodded, a wry smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "I'm not the same person I was when I left you, Sophia. I regret it every day." Sophia's gaze remained unwavering. "You should." He flinched, the sharpness of her words cutting deeper than he expected, but she wasn't done. "I know you regret leaving me," she continued, her voice softening slightly, "but that's not the reason I agreed to meet you today." James furrowed his brow. "Then why? What do you want from me?" Sophia paused, taking a deep breath before speaking. "I need to tell you something I should have told you long ago." Her eyes met his, a flicker of something unreadable in them. "The child you abandoned, he's not yours." The words hit him like a slap to the face. He leaned back, stunned, the room spinning around him as the truth sunk in. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Sophia's eyes were steady. "When I found out I was pregnant, there was a moment of weakness. I made a mistake. The father of my son. It wasn't you. It was someone else. But I chose to raise him as your son, James. I never told you the truth." The air between them seemed to freeze, the weight of her confession hanging in the space like an unspoken truth. James felt a wave of emotions crash over him, confusion, guilt, a strange sense of relief, and something deeper, more visceral. His son. Her son. The child he had never known. For a moment neither of them spoke. The past, with all its pain, regrets, and untold truths, stretched out before them, finally laid bare. The coffee had long since gone cold between them. James sat in silence, his eyes unfocused as he absorbed the enormity of what Sophia had just revealed. His mind raced, a whirlwind of disbelief and confusion, but beneath that, a strange, simmering realization began to settle. The truth she had laid out was undeniable, yet it was something he hadn't expected to hear. His son wasn't his. The child he had abandoned, the child who had unknowingly borne the weight of his neglect, was not his biological son. A surge of guilt coursed through him, a powerful wave of shame that he had never known could exist in him. How could he have walked away from a life he had never truly known? How could he have chosen wealth, status, and success over the one thing that could have given him real meaning, family? He sat back in his chair, his hands clenched tightly in his lap, and closed his eyes for a moment. The years of self-deception, the lies he had told himself, everything had come crashing down. What had he really lost? What had his ambition really cost him? Sophia, calm and composed, watched him, waiting for him to speak. She wasn't angry, she wasn't expecting an apology. She had made peace with everything long ago. But James, the man who had once been so certain of his path, was now staring at the fragments of a life he had never allowed himself to have. "It doesn't change what I lost, Sophia," he finally said, his voice hoarse. "It doesn't change the fact that I wasn't there when I should have been." Sophia nodded slowly, understanding. "I'm not asking you to fix the past. I'm not asking for your forgiveness, James. I've moved on. What's left now is simply the truth." For a long moment, the only sound between them was the faint hum of the city outside. James felt the weight of her words settle into him, deep into the core of his being. The truth. That was the one thing he had never truly faced, his own truth, his own choices. "I didn't know," he said finally, the words feeling foreign as they left his mouth. "I didn't know what it meant to truly regret something. Not until now. All these years, I thought I was chasing something, but I wasn't chasing anything that mattered. I was running away from everything that did." Sophia didn't respond immediately. She simply stared at him, her face unreadable. In her eyes, James could see the scars of the past, scars that had healed, that had shaped her into the woman she had become. She wasn't the same person who had stood by him, hoping he would come around. She had built a life for herself, independent, strong, and whole. She had learned to love herself, to love her son, to love the life she had built. It had taken years of pain, years of solitude, but it had also given her strength. Strength that James could now see, but could never fully understand. "I've built a life without you, James," she said softly. "A life I'm proud of. I don't need you to validate it. I don't need you to validate me." James swallowed hard, his throat tight. "I know," he whispered. "I know I can never undo what I've done, but I don't want to live with the regret of not trying to make it right. I don't know if there's a future for us, but I want to at least try to be part of your life, your son's life, if you'll let me." Sophia's expression softened, but only slightly. "You're welcome to try," she said, her voice steady, "but it won't be easy. And it's not just about what you lost. It's about what you still have to learn, what you still need to change. Your life, your choices, they're hollow. You've sacrificed everything for wealth, James. But in the process, you've lost the very thing that could have made you whole." James looked at her, and for the first time in years, he saw the truth in her eyes, the truth about himself. He wasn't just a businessman, a millionaire, a success story. He was a man who had run from the most important thing in life, who had chosen ambition over love, who had sacrificed his own heart for a fleeting sense of power. "I don't know if I can change," he confessed, his voice barely above a whisper, "but I want to try. I want to try for you, For him, for my son. Sophia didn't say anything more. She simply nodded, a quiet acceptance in her gaze. She didn't expect miracles. She didn't expect him to change overnight, but she could see that something had shifted in him. Maybe, just maybe, there was a chance if he was willing to do the work, to face the truth, and to rebuild what had been broken. Later that day, James sat in his office, staring out at the city below, lost in thought. The past few hours had been a whirlwind of emotions, but the weight of what had happened didn't seem to lessen. He couldn't stop thinking about Sophia, about her strength, her transformation. She had done it all without him. She had built a life he had never thought possible. His thoughts were interrupted by the sound of his office door opening. Liam stepped in, his usual calm demeanor betraying a hint of concern in his eyes. "James," Liam said, his voice measured. "I thought I'd find you here." James didn't respond immediately, his mind still swirling with the events of the day. Finally, he turned toward Liam, his expression weary. "I don't know what to do anymore." Liam sighed, stepping further into the room. "I've known you for a long time, James. I've watched you chase success. But I've also seen the price you've paid, the people you've lost, the relationships you've sacrificed, and it's been eating at you for years. You've been running from something, haven't you?" James looked at Liam, the weight of his friend's words sinking in. "I don't know if I've ever really known what I was running toward. I thought success would fill the hole, but all it's done is make it bigger." Liam's gaze softened. "You've built an empire, James, but what good is it if you don't have anything real to hold on to? People like you, people who are so driven, they lose sight of what really matters. And that's where you're at now. You've lost everything for a dream that was never real." James's throat tightened as Liam's words hit their mark. He had always trusted Liam, respected him. But hearing this now, hearing someone else finally name the emptiness he had been feeling, was like a cold slap in the face. "You're right," James whispered, "but I don't know how to fix it." Liam gave him a pointed look. "Maybe it's not about fixing it, James. Maybe it's about starting over. You've spent so long chasing what you thought you wanted, but now you need to figure out what's worth chasing. And maybe it's time to stop running." James nodded, his heart heavy with the realization. The reckoning had only just begun, and this time he wasn't running from it. The air between James and Sophia had shifted over the past few weeks. What had once felt like a chasm of unspoken resentment was now filled with quiet understanding, a mutual acknowledgement that they had both endured their own separate battles and neither could change the other's past. They had spoken often since their initial reunion, sometimes about the pain of their separation, sometimes about their present lives. But now, as they sat across from each other in a small, quiet room, the atmosphere felt different. This was the moment that had been building for years. James, usually so composed, sat uncomfortably in his chair, his eyes tracing the worn lines of the coffee table between them. The silence hung heavy, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was as if both of them were waiting for something, waiting for the right words, the right moment to come to terms with all that had been left unsaid. Sophia leaned forward slightly, her hands clasped together, her gaze steady but kind. "James," she began, her voice low but resolute, "you've been asking for forgiveness for the past, for what you did. But forgiveness isn't just about what you've done, it's about what you failed to do." James looked up, meeting her gaze, and the weight of her words sank in slowly. It wasn't just about his abandonment of her, about the coldness with which he had turned his back on everything they could have had. It was about the man he had become, the one who had forgotten what it meant to be human, to be present, to be part of something real. "I've never really thought about it that way," he said quietly. "I've been so focused on the past, on my mistakes, that I forgot to see what I've been missing in the present." Sophia's expression softened, but there was no trace of pity in her eyes. She wasn't here to save him or fix him. She had done the hard work of saving herself, of building a life that no longer revolved around him or the man he had once been. You've spent so many years building this empire, James, she continued, her voice steady. But what you've really been building is a prison of your own making. And I can't be a part of that. I won't be part of someone else's version of success if it means losing myself in the process. James swallowed hard, the truth of her words cutting deeper than anything he had ever experienced. He had spent so much time chasing power, status and wealth, thinking that they were the keys to everything, thinking they would fill the void inside him. But the void had never been about money or success. It had always been about connection, about love, about the very things he had cast aside in his pursuit of more. I want to reconnect with him, James said, his voice thick with emotion. I want to be part of his life, your son's life. I know it won't be easy, and I know I can't undo what's been done. But I have to try, for him. Sophia's eyes softened with a quiet understanding. I know you want to be part of his life, James, but it's not just about wanting. It's about showing up consistently, being present in ways that you've never been before, and that's something you'll have to prove, not just to me, but to him. She paused, allowing the weight of her words to settle between them. James felt his chest tighten, but he didn't look away. He knew the path ahead wouldn't be easy. He knew that rebuilding a relationship with his son, after all these years of silence and absence, would take more than just words. But for the first time in years, he felt a flicker of hope, real hope, not the kind of fleeting ambition he had once chased, but the kind that came from truly desiring to change. Sophia continued, her voice soft but unwavering. I've forgiven you, James, not for what you did, but for what you failed to do, and I've let go of the past because I have to. I've built a life that I'm proud of, but I need you to understand that I've moved forward. I'm not asking you to be the man you were before. I'm asking you to be someone new, to focus on your own growth. James nodded slowly, the weight of her forgiveness settling on his heart like a balm. He knew that this was the only way forward. He had to rebuild himself from the ground up, but not for her, for himself. The night of the awards ceremony arrived, and the room buzzed with anticipation. The prestigious gala was filled with the who's who of New York's elite entrepreneurs, philanthropists, and industry leaders, all gathered to celebrate the year's most influential figures. James sat at his table, his eyes scanning the room, but his thoughts were elsewhere. He had barely noticed the lavish surroundings or the conversations that swirled around him. All his attention was focused on one person, Sophia. Tonight was her night. She was being honored for her work with single mothers and abandoned children, an award for her charity efforts, for the life she had built, for the person she had become. As the ceremony went on, James couldn't help but feel a deep sense of awe as he watched her approach the stage. She stood tall and confident, dressed in a simple yet elegant gown, her presence commanding attention. She was radiant, not just in her beauty, but in the way she carried herself, graceful, assured, at peace. She had become everything he had never allowed himself to be. The applause that followed her speech was deafening, but James could only focus on her words. Sophia's voice, steady and clear, filled the room. Resilience is something we learn not through success, but through failure. Love isn't defined by the mistakes we make, but by our ability to grow from them. And family is about who chooses to be there, not who you're born to. Her words struck James like a thunderclap, echoing in his chest with an intensity he had never known. The woman who had once needed him, who had once hoped for him, was now speaking to a room full of people, sharing a truth that he had only just begun to understand. She wasn't angry with him anymore. She wasn't seeking anything from him. She was simply living her truth, standing tall in a life she had built with love, with care, and with fierce determination. As the applause rang out, James watched her with a mixture of admiration and regret. She had become the version of herself that he could never be, the one who had found peace in herself, in her choices. And for the first time, James realized that he couldn't change the past. No amount of wealth or power could ever take away the years he had wasted. But perhaps, just perhaps, he could begin again. The ceremony continued, but James wasn't really listening anymore. He was already thinking about the future he could still build, the one that could be filled with honesty, with authenticity. It was a long road ahead, but he was ready to walk it. Sophia had found her peace. Now it was time for him to find his. The quiet hum of the city outside his office window seemed distant to James now, almost irrelevant. The glossy skyline that had once represented everything he strived for now seemed to hold little appeal. His gaze rested on the papers before him, but his mind was far away, lost in the memories of the past weeks, the conversations with Sophia, the quiet epiphanies, the painful realizations about himself and the life he had lived. He had spent years chasing something that had never truly mattered, and now, for the first time in a long while, he was beginning to question everything. It was early morning, the light from the rising sun casting a warm glow over the city. James hadn't felt this level of clarity in a long time. The pursuit of wealth, of power, those things no longer seemed like the markers of success. His definition of success had changed. He had always measured success by the numbers, by the size of the deals, by the luxury of the lifestyle. But now, standing at the crossroads of his own transformation, he realized that true success was measured not in figures, but in connections. In the bonds he forged with others, in the way he treated the people who mattered most, not just in business, but in life. He thought about his son, the boy who had grown up without him, whose name he had only allowed without guilt. Reconnecting with him would take time to prove himself, time to build trust, time to show that he wasn't the same man who had walked away so many years ago, and he knew that. He wasn't expecting immediate forgiveness or understanding, but for the first time, he wasn't afraid to try. He wasn't afraid to be vulnerable, to take the steps necessary to rebuild what had been broken. James had no illusions about the road ahead. It wouldn't be easy. There would be setbacks, painful moments, and uncomfortable truths along the way. But he was no longer willing to turn his back on the life he could still have. He would take it one step at a time, learning, listening, and most importantly, being present. That was the foundation of any meaningful relationship, wasn't it? As he sat there, reflecting on the change that was slowly taking root within him, a knock on his door pulled him out of his thoughts. It was Liam, his business partner, the one man who had always been there, the one who had watched him from the sidelines as he chased after success and wealth. Liam's eyes were steady, but there was a certain softness in them now that hadn't been there before. "I've been thinking about you, James," Liam said, his voice calm but filled with a quiet sincerity. "You're on a new path, aren't you?" James nodded, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "Yeah, I think I am." Liam studied him for a moment, as if weighing his words carefully. "It's not going to be easy. You know that, right? You can't just flip a switch and expect everything to fall into place, but if anyone can change, it's you." James met Liam's gaze, and for the first time in years, he didn't feel the need to prove anything. "I'm done chasing something that isn't real, Liam. I'm done running. It's time for me to face the truth, not just in business, but in my life." Liam gave him a long look, then finally nodded, as if coming to a quiet understanding. "I'm here for you. You know that, right? No matter what." Meanwhile, across the city, Sophia was continuing her journey in her own way. She had embraced the changes in her life with a quiet grace, her heart full of purpose. Her art had gained the recognition it deserved, and her charity work had expanded beyond her wildest expectations. But more than that, she had found something more valuable than any accolade or recognition. She had found peace within herself. Sophia no longer felt the need to prove anything to anyone. She had long ago stopped seeking validation from others. Her art had become her voice, her passion, and through it, she had built a community of like-minded individuals who shared her vision for a better world, one where love and connection were at the forefront. Her relationship with Emily had deepened, and together they continued to support one another through the highs and lows of life. Sophia had even begun to accept the occasional quiet invitation to share her story about her resilience, her journey as a mother, and the lessons she had learned along the way. But it was never about the spotlight. It was about sharing a truth that had shaped her. She never allowed herself to be consumed by the mistakes of the past. She had long ago made peace with them, and now she could look at her life with gratitude, not regret. She had built a life she was proud of, not in spite of her struggles, but because of them. Each moment, each challenge, had brought her closer to the woman she had become. The road ahead for both of them would be long, but it was no longer defined by the past. James had learned the hard way that wealth and success meant little in the absence of meaningful relationships. Sophia had learned that true empowerment came not from seeking external approval, but from embracing her own worth and authenticity. Together, they had both found the courage to change, to grow, and to move forward. As the story of their lives unfolded, it became clear that the greatest success they could achieve wasn't found in power or status, but in the connections they made along the way. It was in the people they chose to love, the bonds they chose to nurture, and the growth they nurtured within themselves. As the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the city, James and Sophia looked ahead not with fear, but with hope. They knew the future was uncertain, but it was theirs to create. And whatever path they chose, they would walk it with open hearts, knowing that resilience wasn't about being perfect. It was about learning from the past, making amends where needed, and moving forward with the courage to be true to who they were. It was in that truth that they found the strength to face whatever came next. And in the end, that was the most meaningful success of all. When all is over, the old wounds are still there, but they are also valuable lessons that help people realize the true value of love, family, and being honest with themselves. James, despite losing valuable opportunities, found an awakening in life that happiness does not lie in power or money, but in sincere connections and forgiveness. As for Sophia, she not only started over, but also became a model of the strength of resilience, never giving up in the face of challenges. If this story makes you feel emotional, subscribe to continue following the inspirational journeys and profound messages about life, love, and maturity.
Have you ever wondered what lies behind the perfect facade of a power couple? The lavish parties, the penthouse views, the adoring smiles for the camera. Amelia Sterling thought she had it all. A brilliant career, a loving husband who was a self-made millionaire, and their first child on the way. She was living a dream. But in one night, that dream would curdle into a waking nightmare. Her husband, the man she adored, would not only discard her for his younger, more ambitious mistress, but would do so with a cruelty designed to leave her with absolutely nothing. He thought he was closing a chapter, burying a mistake. He had no idea he was unleashing a force he couldn't possibly comprehend. The city lights of New York glittered below the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Park Avenue penthouse, a sprawling tapestry of diamonds scattered on black velvet. Amelia Sterling traced the rim of her water glass, the condensation cool against her fingertips. The crystal chimed softly as she set it down on the polished mahogany of the dining table, a table set for a celebration that felt increasingly hollow. At 29, she was a successful architect, a partner at a boutique firm, but her greatest project, the one she cherished most, was the life she was building with her husband, Damien Thorne. Damien was a force of nature. At 35, he had built his private equity firm, Thorne Capital Investments, from the ground up, earning a reputation for his ruthless business acumen and devastating charm. They had met at a charity gala 4 years ago, a whirlwind romance that saw them married within a year. He was her rock, her champion, the man who saw the fire in her soul. Or so she had believed. Tonight was supposed to be special, She had cooked his favorite meal, seared scallops, with a lemon butter sauce, followed by a perfectly rare filet mignon. A bottle of sparkling cider was chilling for her, while his favorite bottle of a 1998 Chateau Margaux was breathing on the counter. She had news, the kind of news that transforms a couple into a family. She smoothed a hand over her stomach, where a secret fluttered a life barely the size of a blueberry. The click of the key in the lock finally came at 9:45 p.m. Damien strode in his custom-tailored Tom Ford suit, immaculate, not a single silver blonde hair out of place. He looked like he'd stepped off the cover of Forbes, which ironically he had done 2 months prior. "Sorry I'm late," he said, his voice smooth but distant. He loosened his silk tie, his blue eyes sweeping over the meticulously set table without a flicker of warmth. "Big deal brewing with the Sterling Nash merger. You know how it is." Of course, Amelia smiled, pushing aside the small prick of disappointment. "Everything is still warm. I was just so excited to talk to you." He kissed her cheek, a perfunctory, dry gesture that felt more like a social obligation than an act of affection. For the past few months, these little chills had been creeping into their marriage. Late nights became all-nighters. Business trips were extended with little explanation. His phone, once left carelessly on the nightstand, was now perpetually in his pocket or face down on his desk. When she tried to touch him, he would often pull away, murmuring about stress or fatigue. She had told herself it was the pressure of his work. He was building an empire, and empires required sacrifice. She had to be the supportive wife, the calm harbor in his turbulent world. "Sit," she urged, her voice bright. "I have something wonderful to tell you." He sat, allowing her to serve him. He ate mechanically, his gaze fixed somewhere over her shoulder, lost in a world of figures and projections she couldn't enter. The silence stretched thick and uncomfortable, so he began finally placing his fork down with a decisive click. "We need to talk." Amelia's heart leaped. "I know me first." She couldn't contain it any longer. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached across the table and placed her hand over his. "Damien," she began, her eyes shining with unshed tears of joy. "We're pregnant. I'm pregnant. We're going to have a baby." She waited for the explosion of joy, for him to leap up and swing her around, for the cold distance in his eyes to melt away, replaced by the warmth she had fallen in love with. Instead, his face remained a mask of polished stone. He slowly, deliberately removed his hand from under hers. The silence that followed was louder than any shout. It was a void, sucking all the air and light from the room. "Amelia," he said, his voice flat, devoid of any emotion. "That's a complication." The word hit her like a physical blow. "A complication. Damien, it's a baby. Our baby. This is what we've always talked about." "Plans change," he stated, his gaze finally meeting hers. And in their depths, she saw not stress or fatigue, but a chilling reptilian coldness. "I want a divorce." The world tilted on its axis, the glittering city outside blurred into a smear of meaningless lights. "What a divorce?" "You're joking." "This is a joke." Her laugh was a brittle, broken sound. "I have never been more serious in my life," he said, leaning back in his chair, the picture of detached composure. "I'm in love with someone else." The confession was delivered with the same casual tone he might use to discuss the stock market. Each word was a precision strike designed to inflict maximum damage. Who? The question was a raw whisper. Serafina Dubois. She's an associate in my M&A department. She understands my world, my ambition. He said her name as if it were a rare vintage something precious and refined. Amelia's mind reeled. Serafina, a stunning, fiercely intelligent woman in her mid-20s she'd met at a company Christmas party. Amelia had even commented to Damien how bright she was. The memory was now coated in acid. How long, she asked, her voice trembling. 6 months. 6 months of lies. 6 months of stolen weekends, feigned business trips, and touches that belonged to her. The nausea that rose in her throat had nothing to do with her pregnancy. You're leaving me, while I'm pregnant with your child. For her. The absurdity, the sheer unadulterated cruelty of it was incomprehensible. The pregnancy is unfortunate timing. I'll admit, he said, a flicker of annoyance crossing his features, but it doesn't change the facts. This marriage is over. My lawyers will be in touch with you tomorrow. I expect you to be cooperative. Cooperative? She choked out a raw, hysterical anger, beginning to burn through the shock. You want me to be cooperative? You've been cheating on me for half a year, and you're throwing me away like a bad investment. Don't be so dramatic, Amelia. He sighed, standing up and straightening his tie. It was a gesture of finality, of dismissal. It's just business, a merger that didn't work out. I'll be staying at the club tonight. I suggest you have your things packed by the end of the week. Serafina will be moving in. He turned to leave his back straight, his shoulders unburdened by the life he was shattering. Damien, wait, she cried, stumbling to her feet. The baby. This is your child. He paused at the doorway, turning his head slightly. The cold blue of his eyes pinned her in place. Prove it. He said the words dripping with venom. As far as I'm concerned, that's your problem now. My lawyers will handle the details of the prenuptial agreement. You'll find it's quite ironclad. And then he was gone. The heavy door clicked shut, sealing the tomb of their marriage. Amelia stood alone in the center of the room, the scent of the uneaten feast mingling with the metallic tang of betrayal. Her hand went to her stomach, a protective, instinctual gesture. She wasn't just losing her husband, her home, her future. He was trying to take her identity, her dignity, and even the legitimacy of their unborn child. The glittering cage had become a prison, and its door had just been slammed shut, leaving her trapped in the ruins of a life she no longer recognized. The fight for her survival and her child's had just begun. The following days bled into a grey, featureless blur of grief and humiliation. The world that had once felt so vibrant and full of promise had been reduced to the sterile, intimidating confines of a lawyer's office. Damien's legal team from the prestigious firm of Gable and Thorne. Legal moved with the swift, merciless efficiency of sharks scenting blood. They were not there to negotiate. They were there to dictate the terms of her surrender. Amelia sat opposite a man named Mr. Peterson, a senior partner with a face like sculpted granite and eyes that held no sympathy. Her own lawyer, a kind but overwhelmed woman named Carol, recommended by a friend, looked increasingly distressed as Peterson laid out the terms. As per the prenuptial agreement signed by Ms. Sterling on June 12, 2021. Peterson droned his voice, a monotonous weapon in the event of a dissolution of the marriage. She is entitled to a one-time payment of $50,000 and is required to vacate any and all properties owned by Mr. Thorne within 7 days of the filing. $50,000? Carol interjected, her voice sharp. That's insulting. They've been married for 4 years. Amelia gave up a promotion at her firm to support Mr. Thorne's social and business obligations. Peterson offered a thin, dismissive smile. A choice she made freely. The document is airtight. Mr. Thorne has also graciously offered to cover her moving expenses up to $2,000. The word graciously hung in the air, a monument to Damien's cruelty. He was worth hundreds of millions. This wasn't a settlement. It was a final slap in the face. And the child Amelia asked, her voice barely a whisper. Her hand rested protectively on her still flat stomach. Peterson adjusted his glasses, his gaze cold. Mr. Thorne contests the paternity. He is willing to submit to a DNA test after the child is born. Until such time, he will make no provisions. If he is proven to be the father, he will fulfill his minimum legal obligations as determined by the state. Nothing more. The public clinical denial of their child was a new, deeper level of pain. It was a calculated move to isolate and shame her. He was painting her as a liar, a gold digger, a woman of questionable morals. The narrative was being written, and she was its villain. The next few days were a frantic, tear-filled scramble. Packaged boxes, once filled with the promise of a shared future, now littered the pristine marble floors of the penthouse. Each object was a memory, a ghost. The vase they bought in Tuscany. The first edition book of poetry he'd given her on their first anniversary. The silver picture frame holding a photo of them on their wedding day, 2 smiling strangers from another lifetime. She packed it all, a curator of her own heartbreak. Her best friend, Chloe Vance, was her savior. A whirlwind of practical energy and righteous fury, Chloe arrived with boxes, packing tape, and a bottle of non-alcoholic wine. The man is a sociopath, Amelia, a genuine grade A monster, Chloe declared expertly, wrapping a set of wine glasses in newspaper, and her Serafina Dubois. I looked her up, climbed the corporate ladder on her back from what I hear. This isn't love. It's a hostile takeover of your life. Amelia could only nod, her throat thick with unshed tears. The shame was a physical weight pressing down on her chest. The news had already started to leak among their social circle. The whispers followed her like a shadow. Did you hear about the Thornes? He left her. Apparently she trapped him with a pregnancy. He's with that brilliant girl from his office now. Damien and Serafina controlled the story, and they were painting her as unhinged and desperate. The final day in the penthouse was the worst. The movers had taken the last of her boxes. The vast apartment echoed with emptiness. As she was about to leave, the elevator doors opened, and Serafina stepped out holding a designer key fob. She was dressed in a sleek white power suit, her dark hair pulled back in a severe, elegant chignon. She looked like she belonged there. Amelia, she said, her voice dripping with faux sympathy. I was hoping I wouldn't run into you. This must be so difficult. Amelia clutched her purse, her knuckles white. Get out of my way, Serafina. Serafina's smile was a slash of crimson lipstick. I just wanted to say I'm truly sorry for your situation. But you can't stand in the way of progress. Damien needs a partner, not a project. He's destined for greatness, and he can't be held back by domestic trivialities. The condescension was breathtaking. Trivialities. You mean his child? Serafina waved a dismissive hand, a large diamond flashing on her ring finger, a ring Amelia had never seen before. Damien has his doubts, and frankly, your emotional state right now doesn't exactly inspire confidence. I'll be redecorating, of course. This place is a little dated. Too much soft personal sentiment. It needs a cleaner, more modern aesthetic. It was a final, brutal assertion of dominance. Serafina wasn't just taking her husband. She was erasing every trace of her existence. Amelia walked out without another word. Her dignity, the only thing she had left to cling to. She moved into a small one-bedroom apartment in Greenwich Village that Chloe had helped her find. The contrast was jarring. The constant sound of swans replaced the serene quiet of the penthouse. The view was of a brick wall instead of the city skyline. The $50,000 after paying her lawyer and the first few months' rent felt like a pittance, a countdown timer to destitution. She tried to find work, but her focus was shattered. Morning sickness was a constant draining companion. The stress was taking its toll. One afternoon, while scrolling through a financial news site, a headline caught her eye. Thorn. Capital announces record Q3 profits amid Sterling Nash acquisition. Below the headline was a picture of Damien and Serafina beaming at a press conference. They were the city's new golden couple. He looked happier, more powerful than she had ever seen him. That was when she truly hit rock bottom. Sitting on the floor of her cramped, unfamiliar apartment, surrounded by boxes she had no energy to unpack, Amelia Sterling finally allowed herself to break. The sobs came in racking, gut-wrenching waves for her lost love, for her stolen future, for the innocent child growing inside her, who was already being forced to pay the price for its father's sins. She was alone, pregnant, and on the verge of being penniless in one of the most expensive cities in the world. Damien hadn't just divorced her. He had tried to annihilate her. And as she lay there, the darkness closing in, she felt utterly and completely defeated. There was no way out. There was no hope left. The weeks that followed were a monotonous cycle of survival. Amelia forced herself to eat for the baby's sake, bland crackers and ginger ale becoming her staples. She unpacked her boxes, turning the small apartment into a semblance of a home, though it felt more like a temporary shelter. Her savings dwindled with alarming speed. She took on freelance architectural drafting projects online, working late into the night, her eyes burning from the screen, just to make enough to cover her bills. The world of galas, charity events, and bespoke suits felt like a dream she'd once had. Her reality was now overdue notices and the constant gnawing anxiety of impending poverty. Chloe remained her steadfast anchor. She'd bring groceries, force Amelia to go for walks in Washington Square Park, and rail against Damien with a ferocity that was both terrifying and comforting. You need to sue him for emotional distress, defamation, something, Chloe insisted one evening over takeout pizza. On what grounds? And with what money? Amelia replied, her voice weary. He has a legal army. I have Carol, who he could bury in paperwork before lunchtime. He's made it clear, Chloe. He wants me gone, and he has the power to make it happen. Her spirit was eroded. The fight had gone out of her. Her focus was singular. Get through the next 9 months, have a healthy baby, and then figure out how to be a single mother with no safety net. It was on a dreary Tuesday in late November, the city air crisp with the promise of a cold winter, that the letter arrived. It was innocuous at first, just another piece of mail in the mountain of bills and junk circulars. But this one was different. The envelope was thick, heavy, cream-colored cardstock with an elegant embossed return address in the corner, Finch and Sterling Solicitors. 12. Old Square, Lincoln's Inn, London, Finch and Sterling. The name sent a strange, faint hum through her. Sterling was her maiden name. She'd always been told her parents had died in a car crash when she was an infant, leaving her with no known relatives. She was raised in the foster care system until she was adopted by a kind middle-class couple in Connecticut who had since passed away. She had no family. She had no connection to a prestigious London law firm. Her first thought was that it was a mistake. Or perhaps in some bizarre twist, it was from a distant relative of her adoptive parents. With trembling fingers, she slit open the envelope. The letter inside was typed on matching letterhead, the language formal and precise. Dear Miss Amelia Sterling, it is with regret that we must inform you of the passing of your maternal grandfather, Mr. Arthur Kensington, on November 15th. We have been attempting to locate you for some time. As the executor of Mr. Kensington's estate, it is my duty to inform you that you are named as the primary beneficiary in his last will and testament. It is imperative that you contact our offices at your earliest convenience to arrange a meeting either in person in London or via a secure video conference to discuss the details of the estate and the execution of the will. Please accept our sincerest condolences for your loss. Yours faithfully, Alistair Finch, Senior Partner. Finch and Sterling. Amelia read the letter 3 times. The words seemed to swim before her eyes, refusing to make sense. Maternal grandfather, Arthur Kensington. The name meant nothing to her. She had no maternal grandfather. Her mother, according to the scant records she'd seen, was an orphan herself. This had to be a cruel, elaborate prank, or worse, a scam. Yet there was an undeniable weight of authenticity to it. The thick paper, the London address, the formal tone. She quickly searched for Finch and Sterling online. The firm was not just real. It was one of London's oldest and most respected law firms, specializing in estate planning for high net worth individuals for over 2 centuries. Then she typed Arthur Kensington. The results stole her breath. Article after article appeared from publications like the Financial Times, the Wall Street Journal, and The Economist. Arthur Kensington wasn't just some wealthy old man. He was a titan. He was the reclusive, legendary founder and chairman of Kensington Global Holdings, a multi-billion-dollar conglomerate with interests in shipping real estate technology and pharmaceuticals. He was a kingmaker in global finance, a name whispered with awe and reverence in boardrooms from London to Tokyo. Photographs showed a stern, imposing man with piercing grey eyes and a mane of white hair, even in his old age. And this man was supposedly her grandfather. The world, which had already been turned upside down, once felt like it was dissolving into sheer fantasy. It was impossible. Her life was this small apartment, this dwindling bank account, this unborn child whose father denied its existence. Her life was not multi-billion-dollar conglomerates and London solicitors. She called Chloe immediately, her voice a frantic, breathless mess as she read the letter aloud. Whoa. Slow down, Chloe said. Arthur Kensington. Arthur Kensington. Amelia. This has to be a scam. Someone found your name and is trying to get your personal information. But the law firm is real, Chloe. And they're not asking for my bank details. They're asking for a meeting. And look at the firm's name. Finch and Sterling, my maiden name. A silence fell on the other end of the line. Okay, Chloe said slowly. That is weird. Really weird. What do I do? You proceed with extreme caution. Chloe advised, her lawyerly instincts kicking in. Do not give them any personal information. No social security number. No bank accounts. Nothing. Set up the video conference. Let them talk. I'll be right there with you on mute, listening to every word. If it's a scam, we'll shut it down. But Amelia, what if it's real? If this is actually real? Everything is about to change. Amelia ended the call, her heart hammering against her ribs. She looked around her small apartment at the peeling paint on the windowsill and the worn-out thrift store armchair. She then looked back at the letter, at the name Arthur Kensington, and the vast, dizzying chasm between those two realities. For the first time in months, a feeling other than grief or fear barked within her. It was a terrifying, fragile flicker of something she hadn't felt since Damien walked out that door. Hope. It was a dangerous, seductive feeling, but she couldn't help but cling to it. With nothing left to lose, she took a deep breath and drafted an email to Mr. Pessimist, Alistair Finch, a single keystroke that would either expose a cruel hoax or unlock a past she never knew she had. The video conference was scheduled for 2 days later. Amelia set up her laptop on the small dining table, her hands slick with nervous perspiration. Chloe sat beside her, a legal pad in her lap, and a skeptical expression on her face. The screen flickered to life, revealing a man who perfectly matched the gravitas of his firm's letterhead. Alistair Finch appeared to be in his late 60s, with kind, discerning eyes behind a pair of silver-rimmed spectacles and a neatly trimmed gauze-grey beard. He sat in what was clearly a wood-panelled office with leather-bound books lining the walls behind him. Miss Sterling, thank you for making the time to speak with me. He began, his voice a calm, cultured baritone that carried the weight of English authority. I am Alistair Finch, and please allow me again to offer my condolences on the passing of your grandfather, Mr. Finch. Amelia started, her voice steadier than she expected. I appreciate you reaching out, but I have to be honest. I believe there has been a mistake. My parents died when I was a baby. I was raised in the foster system. I have no known family, certainly not a grandfather named Arthur Kensington. Mr. Finch listened patiently, his hands steepled on the desk before him. When she finished, he gave a sad, knowing nod. There has been no mistake, Miss Sterling, he said gently. The story you were told was incomplete. It was a fabrication designed to protect you. He then began to unravel the story of her life, a story so profoundly different from the one she knew that it felt like he was describing a stranger. Her mother was not an orphan. Her name was Elizabeth Sterling, and she was Arthur Kensington's only child, his beloved daughter. Your mother was a brilliant, free-spirited woman. Finch explained, his expression softening with memory. But she was also headstrong. She fell in love with the man your grandfather deeply disapproved of, an American journalist, a war correspondent named Gentleman David. Arthur saw him as a reckless fortune hunter, unworthy of his daughter and the Kensington legacy. He painted a picture of a classic family feud, an immovable, powerful patriarch, and a daughter determined to choose love over duty. Elizabeth and David eloped and moved to the United States, severing all ties with Arthur. For years he heard nothing, his pride and anger creating a chasm between them. Then, a little over 28 years ago, he received a letter from your father. Finch continued. Elizabeth had given birth to a daughter, you. David wrote to Arthur, hoping the birth of his grandchild would thaw his heart and lead to a reconciliation. But Arthur, in his stubbornness, never replied. A few months later, tragedy struck. Elizabeth and David were covering a story in a conflict zone in South America when they were caught in the crossfire. They were killed instantly. Amelia felt a wave of dizziness. This wasn't a car crash. Her parents were heroes journalists who died in the line of duty. Arthur was devastated, Finch said, his voice dropping. The guilt consumed him. He had lost his only child because of his pride. He immediately flew to the States to find you, his only living connection to his daughter. But when he arrived, you were gone. The local authorities, seeing no next of kin, had already placed you into the state's foster care system, and due to privacy laws and sealed records, even with all his wealth and influence, he hit a wall. You had vanished. For years, Arthur Kensington had employed the best private investigators in the world to find his lost granddaughter. It became his life's obsession. He built his global empire, but it was a hollow kingdom without his heir. It was only 3 years ago that an investigator finally had a breakthrough tracing a sealed adoption record to a couple in Connecticut, and from there to an architect in New York named Amelia Sterling. He wanted to contact you immediately, Finch said. But he saw you were married, seemingly happy and successful. He was an old man filled with regret. He feared that his sudden appearance would disrupt your life, that you would hate him for the years of silence. He chose to watch you from a distance, gathering every piece of news about you he could. He was immensely proud of your career, of the woman you had become. Tears were streaming freely down Amelia's face now. Chloe reached over and squeezed her hand, her own eyes wide with shock. In his final years, his health failing, he amended his will, Finch concluded. He left everything to you. He saw it not as a gift, but as a long overdue apology. His legacy, he wrote in a letter he left for you, was not his company, but his daughter's child. Finch held up a document to the camera. Ms. Sterling, as the sole heir of Arthur Kensington, you are the new majority shareholder and controlling owner of Kensington Global Holdings and all its subsidiary assets. The company is currently valued conservatively at approximately $47 billion. The number was so astronomical, so utterly beyond the realm of comprehension, that Amelia almost laughed. $47 billion. Just last week, she had been agonizing over a $300 electricity bill. Chloe let out a low whistle beside her. There are, of course, extensive properties trusts and personal effects, Finch added, as if this were an afterthought. A manor in the English countryside, a villa in Lake Como, a collection of modern art. The list is quite extensive. The reality of it began to sink in a seismic shock that rearranged her entire understanding of who she was. She wasn't an orphan. She was a Kensington. She came from a line of immense power and wealth. The loneliness that had been a constant companion her entire life was suddenly replaced by the ghost of a family she never knew she had. I don't know what to say, Amelia stammered, wiping her eyes. There is nothing you need to say right now, my dear Finch said, his tone paternal. This is a great deal to process. We have a team ready to assist you with everything from the legal transition to simply answering your questions. The first step would be for you to come to London to sign the necessary documents and formally assume your position. The call ended a few minutes later, with promises to arrange travel and further correspondence. Amelia closed the laptop, and the tiny apartment fell silent. Chloe finally broke the silence. Okay. So, you're basically a princess. Amelia shook her head, a dazed, watery smile on her face. I don't even know what I am. Then a new feeling began to crystallize through the shock and grief. It was a cold, hard resolve. She thought of Damien and his petty $50,000 settlement. She thought of Serafina, redecorating her home, erasing her. She thought of their smug faces in the news, celebrating a victory built on her destruction. They thought they had crushed Amelia Sterling, the struggling architect from a humble background. They had no idea who she really was. Damien had called their unborn child a complication and a problem. He had dismissed her as a liability. But now she was not a liability. She was a Kensington. And this child, his child, was the heir to a fortune that dwarfed his own 1,000 times over. He had wanted to erase her. But she was about to become the one thing he could never ignore. The power had shifted. The game had changed, and Amelia Sterling was just beginning to understand the rules. The flight to London was a surreal dream. Amelia flew first class on a British Airways flight, a ticket arranged by Mr. Finch's office. She spent the 7-hour journey in a state of suspended disbelief, the gentle hum of the engines, a backdrop to the tectonic plates shifting in her life. She was no longer Amelia the discarded wife. She was Amelia Sterling Kensington, the heiress to a global empire. The name felt foreign on her tongue, a costume she had yet to grow into. London was grey and majestic. A black Bentley was waiting for her at Heathrow, the driver holding a discreet sign with her name. He whisked her away to the Connaught in Mayfair, where a suite, not a room, an entire suite larger than her Greenwich Village apartment, had been prepared for her. It was a world of hushed luxury, of impeccable service and quiet deference. It was the world she was born into, and the one she was now belatedly claiming. The next day she met Alistair Finch at the historic offices of Finch and Sterling. He guided her through a labyrinth of legal documents, each signature another step into her new reality. She was now the chairwoman of Kensington Global Holdings. The board of directors, a collection of grizzled, powerful men who had been loyal to her grandfather for decades, was awaiting her instruction. They will be skeptical at first. Finch warned her gently over tea in his office after the signings were complete. You are young, you are a woman, and you are an unknown quantity. They will test you. Let them, Amelia said, a newfound steel in her voice. The shy, heartbroken woman who had fled New York seemed a lifetime away. Grief and shock had been alchemized into a cold, diamond-hard purpose. My grandfather built an empire. I will not be the one to let it crumble. For the next 2 months, Amelia immersed herself in a brutal, self-imposed crash course. She lived and breathed Kensington Global Holdings. She devoured decades of financial reports, market analyses, and strategic plans. She met with every department head, from the grizzled chief of their shipping division to the wunderkind CEO of their new tech venture fund. She didn't pretend to be an expert. She listened, she learned, and she asked sharp, insightful questions that betrayed her architect's mind, a mind trained to see structure, weakness, and potential in complex systems. Slowly she won their respect. They saw not a flighty heiress, but a focused, intelligent, and fiercely determined leader. She wasn't her grandfather. She was quieter, more collaborative, but she possessed his iron will. She also began to quietly assemble her own personal team. She hired a formidable new CFO, a woman named Genevieve Croft, known for her aggressive and brilliant financial strategies. She put a top-tier corporate security firm on retainer, and she established a new private investment vehicle, a subsidiary holding company in Delaware, registered under the anonymous name A.S. Holdings. No one knew what it was for, but no one dared to question her. As her belly swelled with the growing life inside her, so did her power and confidence. The city of London, initially intimidating, began to feel like home. She moved into her grandfather's sprawling countryside manor in the Cotswolds, a place of quiet beauty and history. It was there, in a beautiful room overlooking a garden that had been tended for centuries, that she gave birth to a healthy, beautiful baby girl. She named her Lily Elizabeth Kensington. Holding her daughter for the first time, Amelia felt the last vestiges of the old, her fall away. This tiny, perfect creature was everything. She was the reason for this fight. She was the future of the Kensington legacy. The thought of Damien, who had so callously denied this child, filled her not with sadness but with a glacial rage. While she was on a brief maternity leave, she stayed connected, running the empire from the manor. One afternoon, while reviewing market intelligence reports with Genevieve Croft via video call, a familiar name appeared: Thorn Capital Investments. "They're overextended," Genevieve noted, pointing to a series of charts on the screen. Damien Thorn made a massive, highly leveraged play for the Sterling-Nash merger. He staked the company's future on it. It paid off in the short term, but it's left his firm vulnerable. His debt-to-equity ratio is precarious. A significant dip in the market, or a failure in one of his other key investments, could trigger a cascade. Amelia leaned closer to the screen, her heart beating a little faster. What kind of failure? Genevieve's smile was sharp. Thorn Capital is the primary backer for a major new biotech firm, Innovate Gen Pharmaceuticals. They've poured hundreds of millions into it. Innovate Gen's entire valuation is based on the upcoming FDA approval of a new Alzheimer's drug, Serafrin 9. If that drug fails its Phase 3 trials, Innovate Gen will be worthless overnight. Thorn Capital's stock would plummet. They'd be ripe for a hostile takeover. Amelia looked at Genevieve, a silent understanding passing between them. "Kensington's pharmaceutical division," Amelia said slowly. "Our R&D is second to none. Do we have anything that competes with Serafrin 9? Genevieve's smile widened. "Funny you should ask. We have a drug called Cognisil. Superior efficacy, fewer side effects. We fast-tracked the trials 6 months ago on your grandfather's last directive. The final results are due any day now. If we get approval first and push it to market, we could make Serafrin 9 completely obsolete before it even launches." The pieces clicked into place. The path forward was suddenly brutally clear. This wasn't just about the market anymore. This was about justice. Genevieve Amelia said, her voice calm and steady. "I want you to use AS Holdings. Start quietly acquiring Thorn Capital's debt. Buy it from their lenders. Become their primary creditor. And pull every string we have at the FDA. I want Cognisil's approval expedited. Every resource of Kensington Global is to be focused on this." "Consider it done," Genevieve replied, a glint in her eye. She knew this wasn't just business. Amelia ended the call and walked over to the bassinet where Lily was sleeping peacefully. She gently stroked her daughter's soft cheek. "He thought we were a complication," she whispered. "He thought he could throw us away and forget we ever existed. But we're going to be the foundation of his ruin. He built his empire on ruthlessness. I'll build ours on the ashes of his." The phoenix had risen, and now it was ready to hunt. The next 3 months were a masterclass in corporate warfare, orchestrated with the precision of a seasoned general. From her command center in London, Amelia directed the multi-pronged assault on Damien Thorne's empire. It was a silent, invisible attack, a web being woven around him that he couldn't see until it was too late. Step 1 was the pharmaceutical play. Kensington's lobbying power in Washington, combined with Cognisil's legitimately superior trial data, worked wonders. The FDA granted approval with a speed that made headlines in the medical world. The day Kensington Global announced the immediate market release of Cognisil shares in InnovateGen Pharmaceuticals plummeted by 70%. Damien's flagship investment was suddenly toxic. Step 2 was the debt. AS Holdings, Amelia's anonymous shell corporation, had spent weeks buying up Thorne Capital's debt from various investment banks. The banks were happy to offload the risk, especially with the InnovateGen news rattling the market. In the span of a month, Amelia's holding company became the single largest creditor to her ex-husband's firm. She owned him. Step 3 was the market pressure. Using Kensington's vast financial resources, Genevieve Croft initiated a series of strategic short sells against Thorne Capital's stock. Rumors expertly planted in key financial news outlets began to circulate about the firm's instability and over-leveraged position. The stock, already weakened, began to hemorrhage value. In his New York office, Damien Thorne was in a state of escalating panic. His world was collapsing. The Sterling-Nash merger, once his crowning achievement, was now an anchor dragging him under. His lenders were calling, demanding more collateral. His investors were fleeing. He worked around the clock, his famous charm curdling into raw, desperate anger. He lashed out at his staff, at his partners, and most of all, at Serafina. "This is your fault," he snarled at her one night, throwing a crystal glass against the wall of the penthouse she had so proudly redecorated. "You were supposed to be my partner, the brilliant mind. You told me the InnovateGen play was a sure thing. How could I have known Kensington would come out of nowhere with a miracle drug?" She shot back, her composure finally cracking under the strain. "This isn't my fault, Damien. This is your ego. You bet the entire company on one roll of the dice. Their dream life was imploding. The lavish parties stopped. The fawning press fell silent. The foundation of their relationship, power, success, and money was crumbling, revealing the ugly transactional reality beneath. The final blow came on a crisp spring morning. Damien was in an emergency board meeting trying to stave off a mutiny when his secretary burst in, her face pale. "So you need to see this. It's on every financial network." The television screen showed the breaking news banner. "Mysterious AS Holdings initiates hostile takeover of Thorne Capital." Damien stared dumbfounded. "Who the hell is AS Holdings?" he roared. No one knew. They were a ghost, a phantom entity that had seemingly appeared from nowhere to devour his company. A few hours later, the answer arrived in the form of a legal summons. AS Holdings was calling in its debt, all of it, immediately. Failure to pay would result in the forfeiture of the company's controlling shares, which had been pledged as collateral. It was a checkmate. Thorne Capital was finished. The summons requested a meeting with the principal of AS Holdings to negotiate the terms of the surrender. Damien, a broken and defeated man, agreed. He had to know who had so masterfully destroyed him. He walked into the designated boardroom at the offices of a neutral law firm, expecting to see a rival he knew, Victor Beaumont, of Beaumont Industries, or some other corporate raider. Instead, the room was empty except for a single woman standing by the window, looking out over the city. She was impeccably dressed in a dark blue Armani power suit, her blonde hair cut in a chic, sophisticated bob. She looked poised, confident, and powerful. When she turned around, Damien's blood ran cold. It was Amelia. But it wasn't the Amelia he knew. The soft, loving woman he had discarded was gone. In her place stood a queen, her eyes holding not a trace of love or pain, only the chill of absolute victory. "Amelia," he whispered, his voice cracking. What is this? What are you doing here, negotiating the terms of your surrender?" she said, her voice even and cool. She gestured to the folder on the table. A.S. Holdings, as in Amelia Sterling. "It's my company, or rather one of them." The realization hit him like a physical blow. He staggered back, grabbing the back of a chair for support. "You? How the money?" "Where did you get the money?" "You never once asked about my family. Did you, Damien?" she said, a faint, mirthless smile playing on her lips. "In all our years together, you were so consumed with your own story, your own rise, that you never bothered to learn mine. You just assumed I was no one, that I came from nothing." She let the silence hang in the air before delivering the final devastating truth. "My name is Amelia Sterling Kensington. My grandfather was Arthur Kensington. You didn't divorce a struggling architect. You divorced the sole heir to Kensington Global Holdings." Damien's face went ashen. The scale of his miscalculation was so immense, so cosmically catastrophic, that his mind couldn't process it. He had thrown away a queen, a woman who held more power and wealth in her little finger than he had ever dreamed of, all for an associate. "And about that complication you were so eager to get rid of," Amelia continued, her voice dropping to a dangerously quiet level. "I had a daughter. Her name is Lily Elizabeth Kensington. As my only child, she is the heir to a $47 billion fortune. You demanded a paternity test. I've had one done. Here are the results." She slid a document across the table. It confirmed with 99.99% certainty that Damien Thorne was the father. "You will never see her," Amelia stated, her voice like ice. "You will never have a claim to her or her inheritance. You abandoned her. You denied her. You have forfeited the right to be her father. This," she gestured around the room, symbolizing his ruined company, "is your only legacy. Failure." Damien finally crumbled, slumping into a chair, his head in his hands. He was utterly, comprehensively ruined. He had lost his company, his reputation, his wealth, and the chance to know the child who was heiress to one of the world's greatest fortunes. He had traded it all for a fleeting affair and his own hubris. As Amelia turned to leave, her victory complete, the door opened and Serafina rushed in. "Damien, what's happening? Who is—" She stopped dead when she saw Amelia. Amelia paused and looked at the woman who had helped destroy her life. She saw the fear and confusion in Serafina's eyes. She could have said 1,000 things, gloated, savored the moment. Instead, she offered only a single dismissive glance. "He's all yours now," Amelia said, her voice indifferent. And with that, she walked out of the room, leaving the architects of her misery to drown in the wreckage they had created. In the aftermath of the takeover, the name Thorne Capital Investments was erased from the financial landscape of New York. Amelia, through A.S. Holdings, absorbed its viable assets, folded them into the Kensington portfolio, and liquidated the rest. Damien Thorne was left with nothing but a mountain of personal debt and a reputation so toxic he would never work in finance again. The last Amelia heard, he and Serafina had separated acrimoniously, blaming each other for their downfall. He had reportedly been seen working as a consultant for a small, obscure firm in the Midwest, a king reduced to a pawn. But for Amelia, the victory was not the end of the story. It was the beginning. Revenge had been a powerful motivator, a fire that had forged her into the leader she needed to become. But she knew that fire, if left to burn, would consume her too. Her purpose was no longer defined by Damien's betrayal, but by her daughter's future. She returned to London, not as a vengeful ex-wife, but as the confident and visionary chairwoman of Kensington Global Holdings. She proved to be a natural leader, blending her grandfather's fierce business instincts with a modern, more compassionate approach. She invested heavily in sustainable technologies and ethical business practices, steering the corporate behemoth in a new direction. She established the Elizabeth Sterling Foundation, a massive global charity dedicated to funding education for underprivileged children and protecting journalists in conflict zones, a tribute to the parents she never knew. Her life was full. She split her time between the bustling energy of London and the serene peace of the Cotswolds Manor. Her days were a whirlwind of board meetings, strategic planning, and philanthropic work. But her evenings were reserved for Lily. She would leave the empire at the door and become just a mother, reading bedtime stories, kissing scraped knees, and watching her daughter grow with a heart full of overwhelming love. One afternoon, while overseeing the early stages of a new project, the construction of a state-of-the-art, eco-friendly pediatric hospital in London, she found herself collaborating with a renowned architectural firm. The lead on the project was a man named Victor Beaumont. He was handsome, intelligent, and possessed a quiet integrity that was the antithesis of Damien's flashy charisma. He had been one of Damien's chief rivals, a man who built his company on innovation rather than ruthless acquisition. He approached her as they reviewed blueprints, his eyes filled with genuine admiration. "What you've done with Kensington is remarkable, Miss Kensington," he said. "You've not only honored your grandfather's legacy, you've made it your own. You've given it a conscience." Amelia smiled, a real unguarded smile. "Please call me Amelia. And thank you, Victor. I'm just trying to build something that will last." "I have no doubt you will," he said. "Foundations are everything, and yours is clearly made of something stronger than steel." As she looked at him, and then at the plans for the hospital that would save the lives of countless children, she realized he was right. She had once been the architect of a small life, a life built on the flawed foundation of Damien's love. When he had ripped it all away, she had fallen into ruin. But from those ruins, she had built something far grander. She had built an empire, a legacy, a charity, and a family. She was no longer defined by the man who had tried to destroy her, nor solely by the grandfather who had saved her. She was Amelia Sterling Kensington, a mother, a leader, a philanthropist. She was the architect of her own life, and this time the foundation was unbreakable. Her past was a story of betrayal and loss, but her future was a blueprint of her own design, a magnificent structure built not on revenge, but on resilience, love, and a strength she had discovered deep within herself. She was finally, truly free. What an incredible journey of resilience and empowerment. From the depth of a devastating betrayal to the pinnacle of global power, Amelia's story is a powerful reminder that our circumstances do not define us. It's about how we rise from the ashes, how we reclaim our narrative, and how we can build a new, stronger foundation from the wreckage of the past. She transformed her pain into purpose, not only achieving justice but also creating a better world for her daughter and countless others. Her story proves that the ultimate revenge isn't destruction, but building a life so magnificent that those who wronged you become an insignificant footnote. If Amelia's story of strength and triumph resonated with you, please hit that like button and share this video with someone who might need to hear it. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss our next real-life drama. And we want to hear from you. What would you have done if you were in Amelia's shoes? Let us know in the comments below.